Welcome everyone, and welcome everyone who's just joining to our 7th episode of Planning for Citizen Participation in Mission Ocean and Waters, organised by PREP4BLUE project. So this morning is webinar 7. We've been going since spring 2023. Now we're in our 3rd season. This morning's webinar is titled Fostering Marine Citizenship for Mission Ocean. And I'm going to introduce you to our facilitator in a minute, but before that, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of some background to why we're doing the webinars and what we're going to be discussing this morning. So, sorry, let me click on there. Just for anyone new here or who hasn't attended one of our webinars before, PREP4BLUE and this webinar series is organised in the context of Mission Ocean, or the EU's mission to restore ocean and waters by 2030. On the top of our screen here, you can see it's 3 overarching objectives. So that's to protect and restore marine ecosystems, to prevent and eliminate pollution, and make the blue economy carbon neutral or circular. But what we're specifically interested in here in this webinar series are the citizen and stakeholder engagement targets that the mission has set itself to achieve by 2030. So I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see them at the bottom of the screen here. And by the way, we'll share the links to these recordings and all of the slides to everyone who's registered in the days after this webinar. So the aim of the series really is to look at these targets and to engage with what's coming up in Mission Ocean funding, if that's through Horizon Europe or any other activities that the European Commission organises, and to enable researchers, NGOs, and local authorities to work together best to achieve these, towards achieving these targets and achieving the overall objectives of Mission Ocean by 2030. So this morning, we're going to be talking about marine citizenship, and we'll go into a bit more of what exactly that is and how it might be supported in a minute. But because it's related to that, I'd just like to point out that the European Solidarity Corps has just made available 16.5 million for engaging youth in restoration actions across the 5 EU missions. So very briefly, I suppose, the European Solidarity Corps is a way of linking volunteers from around Europe to projects or initiatives or organizations or actions that need help, that have an activity and they need help. They need volunteer help in making it happen. We've actually done an episode before on how to leverage the Solidarity Corps for Mission Ocean activities. So I'd encourage you all, anyone who has missed that, to go back and watch this. We'll put the link in the chat in a second there, because it will be very relevant to what we're talking about today. And that's fantastic funding to be able to leverage as part of Mission Ocean activities. So I think that's it from me for now. I will go on. Yes. I will stop sharing, and I'm just going to introduce our facilitator this morning. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Pamela Buchan with us. Pamela is an interdisciplinary marine scientist and a research fellow at the University of Exeter. Her PhD was actually on the topic of marine citizenship, so she's very much an expert in the space. And since doing the PhD, she's been engaged in a wide range of research projects concerned with social impact of marine activities and participatory marine governance. And that's not to mention a career in politics. So I'll let her go through. I know she's going to talk a bit about that experience in a minute. But for now, I'd just like to give you the floor, Pamela. Thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Thanks, Dave. So I'll just share. Always takes a little time. Okay, is that looking?
That's perfect, yeah.
Right for you. Perfect. All right, thank you. Thanks, Dave, for inviting me to speak, and for everybody who's come along to listen to this talk about marine citizenship and why it's important for delivering on Mission Ocean. So my name is Pamela Buchan. As Dave said, I'm a research fellow at Exeter University, where I do this research into the human-ocean relationship from quite a wide and interdisciplinary perspective. So in the talk, I'm going to introduce some key concepts, so marine citizenship, also marine identity, and try to convey how these things can be considered in your own Mission Ocean aligned projects. So first, I'll indulge myself slightly to introduce some of my background, because it really links to the approach that I take to my marine citizenship research, and hopefully that's of interest. Then I'll give an overview of the definition of marine citizenship, its rights and responsibilities components, why it's important for helping us to deliver on the objectives of Mission Ocean, and why mission-related projects should understand and encourage it. I'll summarise some of the evidence from my research about key relationships between marine citizenship action and a range of different factors. I'll introduce the concept of marine identity as a core motivating factor for marine citizenship. And then finally, I'll give some examples of marine citizenship in practice, sharing the marine citizenship depth metric, which hopefully will be useful for people to apply, and how it's applied in the UK through the Plymouth Sound National Marine Park and at the Ocean Conservation Trust. And then finally, just introduce the local government Ocean Recovery Declaration, or motion for the ocean. So before getting into the marine citizenship and into the research, I think it's useful to explain this background that I bring to my work. So I'm an interdisciplinary marine scientist in the UK, and my academic career began in marine biology at Newcastle University, where I was doing research into the behaviour, neuroanatomy and molecular biology of the king ragworm in relation to biological rhythms. And then I kind of moved away from the biology, and a few years later did a master's in coastal zone management and conducted research into stakeholder partnerships. And then following on from that, I ended up in the geography department at Exeter University to do my interdisciplinary PhD in marine citizenship. But outside of academia, I spent the most of a decade working with a charity called the British Science Association, which is dedicated to public engagement with science. And there I managed volunteers and volunteering policy, put on public events and ran science communication networks. And so that gave me quite a good understanding of what is effective and isn't effective in science communication, and also who the common practices tend to reach. Then during my PhD, I was elected as a councillor in Plymouth City Council. So this is a unitary local authority in England. It means it has all of the responsibilities that a municipal authority can have. And there I represented a coastal community and was engaged in a range of committees. So things like the local coastal partnership, Tamar Estuaries Consultative Forum, and also the South West Flood and Coast Committee, and that has the funding and decision-making power for all the kind of flood and coastal defence in the region. And as a councillor, I seconded the Climate Emergency Declaration at Plymouth and also proposed the UK's first local government ocean recovery declaration. Then as a councillor, I was sat on the Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, and I've since been appointed independently to that, and I serve as the vice chair. So in England, we have 10 IFCAs, and they are the decision-making body for fishing management and the MPAs within the 6 nautical miles of inshore waters. And then finally, for the past few years, I've been a port duty holder at the main commercial port in Plymouth. And the Catwater is a trust port, which means that its purpose is to deliver for stakeholders rather than for kind of company profit. So this breadth of experiences gives me quite broad oversight of both marine research and the public, and also of marine governance. And these really do inform my approach to research and engagement with policy. I guess my personal goal is to bridge the gaps between disciplines and between sectors and between government and people. So hopefully this webinar will support that goal by inspiring you to engage with the marine citizenship idea. So a bit more background. Much of what I'm talking about today comes from my marine citizenship research project, which ran from 2016 to 2021. And that was based on data collected from 280 active marine citizens. And I reached them through case studies, 2 different marine groups who were doing voluntary work to support marine conservation, and a national marine citizen science project, which was aimed at establishing a baseline for rocky shore ecology around the UK. So by going through those case studies, I knew that these were people who were already engaged and active marine citizens, so I could study them and see how it is that they came to be so. The investigation was organised into 3 broad themes. People were strongly informed by environmental psychology. So I used very established theories such as Schwartz's basic human values and Clayton's environmental identity index, and also looked at environmental attitudes. And then place intersected between human geography and environmental psychology. So this was examining the nature of the human connections to the ocean as a type of place. I looked at things like visits, living near the sea, place identity and attachment and dependency. But there was also space to kind of induct what it is about the sea that promotes these relationships. And these together are kind of the marine and citizens' internal characteristics, which I felt would probably uncover their motivation to do marine citizenship. But marine citizenship doesn't happen in a vacuum. So the 3rd theme, policy, is sort of shorthand for the complex social, legal and economic arrangements that externally influence marine citizenship. And they might act to increase or decrease access to marine citizenship actions. And through that theme, I also investigated what marine citizenship is and looked at rights of marine citizenship for the first time. So core to the success of this project, the findings of which have been used now in practice, was its interdisciplinary approach and use of mixed methods. I've approached the research with a very holistic mindset, incorporating this wide range of quantitative metrics relating to existing scientific knowledge, but also qualitative methods, so that it could dig into the context of different factors being investigated and give this space for new things to emerge. And I collected my data through online survey, interview, and ethnographic observation. So let's begin with what marine citizenship is. Citizenship has multiple interpretations, which makes it a tricky subject to talk about sometimes, but they generally all describe the different ways that people and a territorial state have a relationship, and that relationship confers rights and responsibilities upon people. So that state's often the nation state or groupings of nations, such as the EU, but there are theories of citizenship which take a global perspective of citizenship as well, and that's really pertinent for this global system of the ocean. So citizenship can be used as the term for residency, kind of recognizing what rights a person has within the nation state, such as voting, and responsibilities, such as paying tax. But it can also be used more broadly, recognizing that citizens are active agents in society and that rights and responsibilities are a negotiation that does change. So active citizenship acknowledges that people create the contract between citizens and states, and that's the kind of citizenship that the marine citizens understand their actions to be. So as a definition, marine citizenship is exercising the right to participate in the transformation of the human-ocean relationship for sustainability. And that definition emerged out of the research findings, making explicit both the rights and the responsibilities. So as environmental scientists, often we're very familiar with the idea of individual responsibilities, things like reducing carbon footprints or making sustainable consumer choices. But there are limitations to what individuals can do within a global system. And so it's important to recognise collective actions too, such as volunteering in environmental action or citizen science or creating political campaigns to create change. And the rights bit is really crucial for effective collective action, because without it, people are excluded as agents of change, unable to take responsibility, and the green transition will fail to gain enough momentum. Marine citizenship rights are participatory rights, and these are enshrined in law through the Aarhus Convention, which is adopted across Europe, and most recently as a fundamental human right by the UN Human Rights Council. And there are three pillars of rights: the right to environmental information, the right to participate in environmental decision-making, and the right to environmental justice. So there is a duty to enable people to be involved in marine decision-making, and that might feel like the responsibility of governments and policymakers, but I'd argue that as researchers, as we begin to engage more directly with the public and with policy, we also have a responsibility to consider these rights when we're designing and disseminating our work. So a first tip for projects aiming to foster marine citizenship is to think about what behaviours you want people to do to take responsibility and how their ability to exercise their rights is changed through the project or through its outcomes. So hopefully that gives you enough of an overview of what marine citizenship is, and we have a quick look at why it's important for Mission Ocean and for researchers and practitioners working to deliver on its aims. A core aim of the mission is to mobilise the public, engaging people in the full spectrum of marine research and policy activities, which is basically marine citizenship. The mission strives for key outcomes that have marine citizenship at their core. It seeks to create an empowered citizenry that participates in ocean governance and is equipped with the information that will enable it to do so effectively. But empowerment can't come from knowledge and education alone. It needs to be partnered with governance systems that give people meaningful access. So the idea of marine citizenship as being both responsibility and participatory rights is already threaded through these objectives, and our challenge is to work out how to deliver this. So in order to understand how to encourage and foster marine citizenship, we really need to understand what motivates it. So this is some of the research that I've done around marine citizenship. There's been a long-standing perception that education, awareness raising, and public understanding will result in behaviour change. And for quite some decades, we've pursued a course of environmental education. But I imagine all the listeners today would agree that we continue to be faced with the challenge of climate change and that we're struggling to deliver the environmental sustainability that we want. And one reason is that there's a gap between knowledge and action. And that's because other factors mediate how knowledge is selected, interpreted, and applied. So, for example, political ideologies can change the effect of higher education in individuals in terms of their values. More recently, researchers try to acknowledge the influence of values and perceptions, focusing on how caring can be a positive force for action. So first, I'm going to share my work on values and marine citizenship. In my research, I use the Schwartz basic human values theory to get right down to the core values of marine citizens. And it's super well replicated. It's used in a lot of different pieces of research. So it's a great theory for applying. And it states that there are 10 core values that underlie all the other different shapes of values and moral beliefs, and that they're organized in a sort of continuum around a circle. So the values are grouped into 4 quadrants, though on the left hedonism sort of straddles 2 quadrants, and the quadrants are organized across 2 poles: self-enhancement to self-transcendence and conservation to openness to change. And the poles are in conflict. So a person has all 10 values, but they'll prioritize them in an individual way, but polar opposite values can't both be prioritized. So to give an example, you can't prioritize having power over other people whilst also prioritizing having empathy and care for wider humanity. Basic human values are measured quite easily using the Portrait Value Questionnaire, which is made up of 21 Likert-style questions, and that can be done to study values both within individuals or across groups. And in my research, I found that as a group, marine citizens most prioritize self-transcendence values, which was not a surprise. It's also the values that most have been researched in relation to pro-environmental behaviours. But you can see from the radar plot and the outside layer line, the maximum line, that with the exception maybe of power, all values were highly prioritised by at least some members of the sample. So in theory, it might be possible to reach all value sets if we can understand how to relate to those values. So as well as the distribution of the values, I looked at their statistical relationship specifically with deeper marine citizenship. And the only one that was significantly positively associated, not universalism and benevolence, they're self-transcendent values, but stimulation. So this is how interesting or stimulating the ocean is to marine citizens. It's not the same thing as knowing about the ocean, but is about valuing what the sea offers as a dynamic and interesting place. And then negatively statistically associated were security and conformity. And that's not very surprising because marine citizenship is about creating change. So in practice, the methods used to engage people often centre on learning about the ecology of the ocean or universalist ideas of humans as being part of the ecosystem. And that will support the stimulation value, but only for people for whom, say, marine ecology is interesting, or for those who prioritise self-transcendent values, which might explain why currently these are the values most present in marine citizens. But they're actually, in general populations, this is a smaller group of people than other value prioritisations. So they're missing the people that we need to really create a social momentum for change. Because I use the mixed methods, the qualitative data help me to uncover the ways in which these different values connect to the ocean and marine citizenship. So these are just some examples, but the important aspects were things like upbringing and social norms around marine connections, having ocean literacy to feel safer in the marine environment, feeling achievement and reward through engaging others in marine issues and creating change in society, enjoying the sensory experience of the sea and feeling of the opportunity and freedom that it can give, and the sense of being part of something bigger and wanting other people to experience the benefits of the ocean. So that gives some insight into the ways that we might diversify public engagement approaches to introduce a wider range of people to marine citizenship. When their values are engaged with, they'll be more interested or stimulated, and that opens the door to deeper engagement with marine citizenship. So understanding values is important for diversifying approaches to public engagement, but it's well known that there is a big value action gap as well. So even where there is concern and intention to do something, it doesn't mean people will go on to take action. Using the qualitative data, I found that marine citizens talk a lot about educating people and raising awareness of marine issues. And public engagement's a really significant citizenship activity. But when they talked about their own marine citizenship and their own motivation, they talked about their love and their passion for the marine environment, not about how much they know about it or the issues that it faces. So is there something about the ocean and the way humans connect with it that fills that gap? And absolutely, the ocean's a really important part of marine citizenship motivation. That was unpicked through the different metrics that are used to measure place dependency and place attachment, and analysing the qualitative data to uncover what it is about the ocean that underpins those connections. So deeper marine citizenship was most strongly associated with needing the ocean or having a marine place dependency, particularly for livelihood, but also for well-being and recreation. And it was also positively related to thalassophilia, which is a marine place attachment that goes beyond sort of specific coastal or marine locations, but is a deep emotional attachment to the ocean in general as a type of place. And there were commonalities in what the sea means to marine citizens as being a place of freedom and challenge, of having high aesthetic quality, and that the ocean's an immersive space which can be experienced in a unique way because of the material properties of the ocean. So if we want to encourage marine citizenship in others, we must do more than consider their values, but also think about the relationship that they have with the sea already and how our projects will encourage an emotional and ultimately a dependent relationship with a healthy ocean. So in terms of introducing the kind of concepts and evidence around marine citizenship, it's important to introduce marine identity as well. And during my research, I just had this feeling that the ocean was part of a sense of identity for marine citizens, which is not a great scientific basis. So it was a bit of a relief when I found that all of the findings mapped really well to Breakwell's identity process theory. So I'll briefly explain what that is. Identity is a huge, complex area of research. So I'll try and summarize that and why it's important for marine citizenship, because I think this might be the most important piece of the puzzle. So first of all, marine identity can be defined as an identity rooted in how the ocean as a place supports the sense of self. And that definition doesn't define how the ocean's understood or the ways in which it connects to the sense of self. So it's a very broad definition, and it can't limit marine identity to being based on a healthy and biodiverse ocean. People can attach to an ecologically unhealthy sea or identify through recreational or livelihood activities which are not sustainable. So as a motivator, marine identity might work for or against or neutrally for marine sustainability. Breakwell's identity process theory describes how identities are formed and how they respond to change. And it's not a static concept. I mentioned Clayton's Environmental Identity Index, which I also used in my research. And that's a kind of metric that takes a snapshot of identification with the natural environment. Whereas identity process theory is this dynamic model, and that's why it's important for marine citizenship. And there's two key elements to the theory. So the first is that identity is multiple, it's social, and it's formed through a continuous process of interaction with society. Social information impacts upon identity. It can reinforce or threaten the sense of self. And identity is a process which must constantly integrate and rationalize this new information. So an action is required when the information is contradictory or challenges the sense of self. So there is that action, that response might be to deny the validity of the information or to change the interpretation of the information to fit the underlying identity. And I think we can think of examples in political discourse where those sorts of actions take place. Or it might require a shift within the identity. So someone might move their sense of self and understanding in order to reconcile that conflict. But it might not be possible to deny the information or change the identity. And then people have to look externally and they're driven to tackle that conflict by changing the situation that produces it. So the second element is that identity has 4 core processes that describe the self. And the first is self-esteem. Some put this as an umbrella over the others, and some have it as a separate element, but it's really about valuing your own self. And then distinctiveness is about seeing oneself as different from others. In order to have an individual identity, a person needs to be distinct in some way. The sense of self needs to have continuity over time, which doesn't mean it's unchanging, but it needs to be congruent in itself over time. And self-efficacy is about being an autonomous and capable person with self-direction. And then the researchers Twigger, Ross and Uzzell, they put place into this identity process theory, recognizing that as well as being social, people are also situated. And so place can impact upon identity components as well. And that's the context that my data map to it. So with self-esteem being promoted by pride in the marine environment, being a good citizen, people who are strongly conformist, we know from research, defer to others for validation. And that reduces their distinctiveness and also their self-efficacy. But marine citizenship, being statistically associated with kind of negatively with conformity, supports them this element of identity. Place-based continuity is about how the place supports the sense of self over time. So early experiences of the sea set the scene for positive emotional responses, and marine citizens then seek to replicate these feelings, seeking out the sea, relocating to the sea, and they feel like they're marine people. And then finally, self-efficacy is probably the easiest to relate to marine citizenship. So as well as active citizenship itself, reinforcing self-efficacy, where there's a marine place dependency, the sea as a place is supporting people to do what they want to do, because what they want to do can only take place in, on, or near the sea. And that might be the most important factor. If what people want to do requires a beautiful, healthy, and biodiverse marine environment, then the degradation of the marine environment threatens their sense of self, and they have to take action. They can't deny the evidence of the change. They can't change who they are because of the strength of their relationship with the ocean. So the only thing remaining is to take action to try and tackle the cause of the ocean degradation. And there is marine citizenship being born. So that's quite a lot of evidence and theory. I know that will be difficult to digest, so I've tried to distill it into 5 core messages to help with your own activities. So first, we need a change in mindset in our approach to marine citizenship. Environmental education is really important as a tool for equipping marine citizens, but it isn't enough in itself to drive marine citizenship in people who aren't already on that journey. And then we see this in values, with those who are already stimulated and interested in marine life being the most responsive to ocean literacy. We need to diversify the messages through project and research design so that we can connect to other kinds of values. Supporting positive ocean experiences is the first step on the path to marine citizenship. Brilliant if they include the breadth of immersive and sensory experience from direct ocean encounters, but other kinds of experiences are important too. And when we engage people in citizen science or public engagement activities, we can think first about how they will be experiencing the ocean and how to make that as positive as possible. For marine identity to be effective in marine citizenship, it needs to be based on a healthy and sustainable marine environment. So we need marine nature recovery to form the baseline of people's ocean connections. And this is where the focus of things like the EU mission basins fits in, pollution in the Mediterranean or nature recovery in the Black Sea and the Atlantic Arctic. And then finally, we need to be able to evidence and evaluate projects in their influence on marine citizenship. And for that, I have this marine citizenship metric, which I'll introduce in a moment. So a key aim of the webinar series is to help marine researchers and practitioners to develop skills for the EU Mission Ocean. And the second part of this webinar, I'm going to share 2 examples of how I've been working with others to put the research findings into practice. The first example is my work with the Plymouth Sound National Marine Park and the Ocean Conservation Trust, and the second is the local government Ocean Recovery Declaration. And these are all really underpinned by co-production and collaboration. So though they're both about work that I've done since completing my research, these sorts of partnerships and collaborations can be written into research projects and funding proposals at the start. A bit of background. Plymouth is a coastal city in the southwest of England, and it's branded as Britain's Ocean City due to its location reaching into the Atlantic and its wide range of marine industries and activities. In 2019, the council made a declaration to create the UK's first national marine park in Plymouth Sound, and this led to the development of partnerships across the city, particularly with the Ocean Conservation Trust, which is an international marine conservation charity and runs the National Marine Aquarium in Plymouth. The Marine Park partners secured funding from the Heritage Lottery Foundation to deliver a 7-year programme of engagement aimed at growing ocean connection in Plymouth and marine citizenship. And so I did an ESRC Postdoctoral Fellowship between 2022 to 23, and one of my programmes of work within that was to engage with the Marine Park, the City Council and the OCT on developing a marine citizenship framework to help support their project design and evaluation. And that framework's been built into the Marine Park delivery plan for the next 5 years, and the OCT have also used it to revise their kind of global learning outcomes and evaluation processes for their public and schools engagement programmes. So what's worked really well here is the opportunity of the National Marine Park, because it's an experiment itself, and so it's open to new ways of doing things. The marine citizenship depth metric is really the starting point of the work to develop a pathway, and it's a fairly simple quantitative tool aimed at measuring how deeply engaged in marine citizenship a person is And to my knowledge, it's the only tool that's been tested to measure this. The scale shown has been adapted from the one that I used in my PhD, which recognises some of the emergent findings of that work. It's a really simple metric. It's basically a list of actions that a person can select whether they do or don't do it. And each is scored according to increasingly public actions, and those focus more on social change than personal change, because that recognises a kind of increased cost of vulnerability or in going public, or actual cost, physical, economic cost. A mean is taken for each of the depth levels, helps create a more rigorous metric. The means are then added together, and that gives the respondent a score that can range between 0 and 15. By putting multiple items in the level as well, that means that people are less likely to be excluded, because there might be activities that they don't do, kind of recreation or job or something. And then the examples in the activities for each category that in this table respond to the qualitative data from my research. But I've tried to organise the scale so that different activities could be included in order to make the scale particularly relevant to a certain audience or project. So it can be applied to get a baseline of an individual group or community, and it can be applied to individual projects to see if they've moved people along the pathway to deeper marine citizenship, or at a wider population level to gauge the impact of initiatives such as the National Marine Park on collective marine citizenship. As well as the depth metric, the Marine Citizenship Framework also makes the research findings more accessible for application in practice. So these are the things I've already described. This table translates the basic human values and the evidence about how they relate to marine citizenship. Green indicates a positive priority in marine citizens, and red a negative, with the values ordered according to the rank from high to low priority, and shows their statistical significance. So it makes clear where the gaps are in who engages in marine citizenship. The people at the bottom of the table are the least engaged. The values are described, examples of how they relate to the marine context are provided, and that can be used then to evaluate current project designs, to inform the design of new projects aimed at diverse value sets, and can also be used to kind of map a whole programme of activities, like in the National Marine Park, so that you can see that the collective set of activities are giving a comprehensive coverage across different value sets and changing audience priorities over time. And then project evaluation can be designed to test how effective that project was in reaching and engaging the target audience. Similarly, the marine place relationships are presented in the framework, highlighting how the ocean is understood by marine citizens, the kinds of emotional responses being sought, for example, love rather than shock, and the relationships to be targeted by different interventions. And there's a similar table for marine identity processes. I've covered that in the talk, so I haven't included the table here. But collectively, the framework gives a structure to target project design. It supports how to evaluate its effectiveness for marine citizenship. And importantly, the framework can be used in any kind of project or intervention, where marine citizenship or ocean connection might even just be a secondary goal. So, for example, how a citizen science project is designed might look different if the individual's experience of the ocean is designed in alongside the type and quality of data that's being collected. And these factors can become a consideration in any project working with people, maximising the potential to create marine citizens. So in this example, the research findings were applied to practice after the research was complete. As I said, you can put partnership into any kind of project, establishing that at the beginning. I've got a project proposal currently under review that includes action research around community participation and the governance of the marine park. That requires partnerships to be established prior to submitting the proposal, and working together to co-produce the research design so that it will deliver both on academic and social aims. And for some funding opportunities, that's not only just a desirable approach, but also a requirement, certainly in the UK funding landscape. So the second example focuses on more the participatory rights side of marine citizenship. And I want to share it as an example of how research findings can be applied in innovative ways. I had the idea for the local government ocean recovery declaration during the COVID lockdowns. Shortly before then, Plymouth City Council declared a climate emergency, but I noticed that the climate action and the local government declarations that were happening right across the country weren't talking about the sea at all, even though there is no effective climate response that doesn't include ocean-based action. And this was before we got our first ocean-based action written in at COP26. So I was thinking about my experience in local and government, about what municipal councils can influence, and bringing that together with my research findings, showing that things like decision-making processes are more accessible and transparent at local scales. So I concluded that this is an important level of government for marine citizenship, and I wanted to create a vehicle for marine citizenship that would make it easier and better understood. So I wrote the first draft of the declaration in 2020 and then brought in colleagues with a national reach across local governments and with interest in creating marine citizenship. And we worked together to revise the wording, get it ready as a model motion. So this is like a document that councils can effectively take off the shelf, tweak it a bit, bring it to a vote, and then that council is responsible for delivering on what they've pledged. And marine citizens can also use it to support their requests to local councillors to ask them to represent marine sustainability. The model motion introduces concepts of sustainable marine use, and it has these set of pledges that councils commit to. It's evolved over the past 2 years, but broadly the pledges are centred around key themes. They're designed to create transparency and accountability through reporting, to embed actions into binding processes such as planning and other strategies that councils have to deliver. They recognise councils as leaders who have influence over other organisations and can support them in delivering for the marine environment. And recognising the importance of ocean connections, as I've introduced you today, there's an ask for ocean experiences for young people, ocean literacy, and to support marine citizenship. And in addition, the council's asked to write to the national government, asking for better recognition of coastal issues, including inshore fisheries, coastal communities, action on marine plastic pollution and sewage and water quality in rivers and seas. And it highlights current marine science recommendations around holistic marine management. So the aspiration is that the more local councils do this and write to government, that there'll be a grassroots upwards pressure onto national government as well. So to date, we've had 26 councils declare across England and Wales. We continue to work with councils looking to declare, and they represent coming up towards 4 million people now. So consequently, both ocean recovery and marine citizenship are being discussed much more in UK local policy, including in the context of climate action. The Local Government Association Coastal Special Interest Group, who's one of the core partners, they work hard to promote the motion across government. And then the Ocean Conservation Trust champions it for marine citizens, encouraging them to contact their councils. And that's a real challenge for the project, knowing how effective it is as a vehicle for marine citizenship. One of the problems in the UK that we have is a relatively low level of citizen engagement. So, for example, only a third of people tend to vote in local elections. Most people are not clear about the responsibilities that are divided between local and national governments. So civic literacy is at least as much of a barrier as ocean literacy for marine citizenship. And that's another consideration for project design. What extent the participants in projects can be supported to learn how to take the first steps in asking for change at a societal level. So again, this project was developed outside of my research, but it won an impact prize from the Economic and Social Research Council in 2022. But a major barrier to the work is that it's completely unfunded, which really limits how quickly achievements can be made. So what's underpinning the success of this project is the collaborative approach to delivering impact, the ongoing support in kind from collaborating organisations and from others who are buying into the project and acting as champions in their own circles of influence. So we'll actually be presenting about the motion for the ocean at a satellite on Monday the 8th at the UN Ocean Decade Conference in April, and that will bring the motion through to a global audience. Not quite, well, maybe for the first time, but you've had a bit of a sneak peek today, so hopefully that's inspiring thinking outside of the box and what you can do with your research. So to finish off, the EU Mission Ocean has got a clear marine citizenship objective, and it wants to see projects engage citizens on a pathway towards participation in marine governance. And we must remember that marine citizenship isn't only those personal actions to reduce harmful impacts upon the environment, but also being given a say on how we use the marine environment. Any project aiming to develop marine citizenship needs to think about the underpinning relationship that people have with the ocean as a core starting point, especially for people who are not already engaged with pro-environmental behaviours or environmental citizenship more generally. Remember that identity is a powerful driver of action, and it might work both ways. So engaging with people's values and their understanding of the ocean is really important. And then finally, success can be increased by diversifying the project design to engage a wider set of people, by working with others and co-developing activities, and by embracing the unknown with creative thinking and just giving things a go, taking a risk. So thanks very much for listening. There's a couple of papers which the webinar's based on, which I've included here. They give a bit more detail about the research and conceptual detail. So looking forward to hopefully having an engaging discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Pam. There's so much there that's really interesting. I've got loads of questions. Maybe just a reminder to the audience as well that please keep questions coming into the Q&A, and we'll post them to Pam as well as we go on. I just saw one just quickly from Clean Coasts. Where can you find the previous episodes of this series? I'm going to get to that in my slides, but maybe Sarah, would you mind posting the link now, just so that everyone can see it, to all of our previous episodes? And that's where this episode will end up living as well. But I will email the links out, or the link out as it's available. Maybe just to start off, so there's so much there, and I think I've said to you before, I find from the questions that are asked in these in previous episodes that what the audience seems to be very interested in is kind of the practical nature of how to kind of implement all these in projects. And I think you said some things that would make for very interesting project design. I mean, the first one that really stood out to me was the marine citizenship depth metric that you mentioned. And I think that's just a really interesting, very, potentially very powerful tool for measuring changes in marine citizenship as projects go on, kind of like prove, what the arc of your project has kind of achieved. Maybe can you say any more about establishing baselines for that, and when should, obviously if that has to happen very early in a project? Because I think the difficulty with all, the monitoring and evaluation is that often projects start and people start researching about what they're going to do, and all of a sudden they're kind of, 6 months down the line before anything is being collected. So yeah, maybe anything you can say.
Yeah, it is difficult to try and get those baseline studies. That's one of the things we talked about quite a lot at the Marine Park, is about how can we, what is the baseline across the whole of Plymouth, and trying to integrate that. I mean, it's not, obviously this is quite new, so it's not something that's being routinely done, but the more that people kind of integrate this sort of basic measurement into projects, then the more, and publish data and so on, then the more there'll be a baseline will grow, if that makes sense. So clearly being able to take this at a starting point as early as possible in the project is really good. It depends on, so like I say, it's quite flexible. It depends on what you want to measure. So if you're looking at an individual's sort of trajectory through marine citizenship, then you can capture them at the start when they first come in. And like I say, it's a very, you can tweak the design in terms of the specific things that you ask about, depending on whether you're focusing in on, say we're working with sailors, for example, and you might want to ask specific questions that related to sailing, or more generally, or you might want it as a very general metric. So you bring that in at the start, and then can do your interventions and obviously repeat it along the way, and that would get great personal, individual longitudinal data. And one of the benefits of it is that it's looking at the actual actions that people do. So it's simple, it doesn't quantify them. They don't have to say how often in the past 12 months have you, it's easy to say, yeah, I do that, I don't do that. But it still gives that sense of action rather than intention. So in my research, I did the marine citizenship depth metric to do statistical tests and so on, but I also looked at intention. So I had another scale that was about, kind of how much I consider the marine environment. It's sort of more value-based, and there's a difference. Statistically, there's a difference in all the variables between intention and action. So trying to get, I actually do it, this is the thing I do, is it would be really, really helpful. But you can then also use it on this kind of group scale. So for things like the Marine Park, we might take this across a sample. There's various citywide surveys and things that happen, and then run some program, and then take another sample. So it's not the same people, it's not a longitudinal data set, but you would get a sense of change collectively across the whole space. And we have lots of conversations around digital platforms that can support people and maybe collect data on the way. So it might be that if they had someone had a profile, say in a website, where they could log in and register things that they've done, or it might be as part of other functionings in a research project, then you can collect that data and the questions on a regular basis and see if people are moving along in towards deeper marine citizenship. And then you can also use that adaptively. So, well, actually people are getting stuck at this level. What do we need to do? How might we need to support people to take that next step and move a bit further? So it's new, but it has a lot of potential, I think, for application in different practical settings as well as research.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And then Christina has asked two questions, or two related questions, and I think it's picking up on something that I also wanted to ask you about. So one of the things that I found really interesting as you were talking, it was this kind of relationship that you were picking out between ocean literacy and civic literacy, which I think is quite nuanced. You know, it's not something that you hear quite often. And again, I think maybe a little bit before you were talking about, you know, the need to not so much promote the values of ocean sustainability, but link that with people's values, you know, like other values. So it's almost like something a little bit different than we usually talk about, like, you know, linking other people's values to valuing a healthy ocean kind of thing, you know. So it's that kind of ocean literacy in a bit of a wider or maybe a more nuanced sense. And so maybe kind of thinking through those kind of problems, Christina has asked a question saying that she's researching participative governance processes in marine protected areas, and she's noticed that there's a gap between stakeholders being invited and them actually coming to meetings. How would you ensure that stakeholder groups are incentivized to participate and feel heard? And then she just asked, in relatedly as well, to what we're talking about, like, how does the perception of social equity by stakeholders relate to your work and to marine citizenship, maybe?
Gosh, that's two really big, complicated questions. I don't think I have the full answers, but yes, absolutely. So that there's so many steps along the way. If you use a social justice framework when you're thinking about participatory governance, that's really helpful to think about where the barriers are. So there's the recognition. So who is invited in the first place, and thinking through, and that's very easy. I do with the research on marine governance I've been doing this year, various evidence reviews and things that are looking at this as well. And it's very easy to say, well, the relevant people are the fishers, or the relevant people are the other marine industries, or that, you know, and not bring it into consider either the wider societal context, what is the national mandate for this particular marine decision, which obviously it depends on the decision whether that's really relevant, but there's not kind of, we don't do sufficient exploration of who other interested or affected people might be. And there's also a tendency for marine issues particularly to say they're offshore, so they're not affecting people because they're happening out there. And we need to do some work. This is like a bit like the mindset change. We need to do some work about the integration between land and sea and across people across land and sea, so that as, you know, we recognize better that these other impacts happen. So that's a kind of starting point. And then there's the procedural bit, which is, you know, the representation of people and how they're being involved. And the design of that can be exclusive, or even when it's inclusive, the point raised in the question, sometimes people don't turn up. And that's, I mean, that is a really big challenge. And it's a really big challenge across governance, not just marine governance. That's really hard. I would have to speculate, and I would say things like, if we haven't done the groundwork around people feeling empowered, people understanding processes, to say, you can come to this process, come along and tell us what you think about this thing that's happening in the sea, or whatever, you know, people might be like, well, what's that got to do with me? Because they also don't know. We all live in the same world, thinking these same things of compartmentalizing stuff, or not understanding or seeing the connection. So there's a lot of work in that about both, why is the marine stuff relevant to me, and making it relevant. That's our job in terms of values and those other things you mentioned before. And then working out how people can feel confident in participating. So it's sometimes it's like, well, I'm just a person. What do I know about that? I don't have the qualifications or the skills. So even when you're inviting it, people may not realize it's relevant, or there's other logistical barriers to participating as well. So in the research, one of the things around that kind of participatory bit was that the smaller scale, the easier it is. So I had not many people, even in marine citizens, have participated in decision making, and most of the people in my sample had participated in the Marine Conservation Zone consultation. So the UK, from our Marine and Coastal Access Act, which was brought in 2009, part of that was to set up these they're MPAs, but these designated marine conservation zones, and there was a big consultation process. So that has been a big opportunity for people to be involved, but still lots of the marine citizens had not been involved. So, you know, and then the way that's delivered was very variable regionally and so on. So the further away things are, they're kind of less accessible. So if you sign a petition and it goes to national government, you might never know what comes back from it, for example. Or if you send in a consultation response to a strategy, a net zero strategy. I'll send in something and say some views. What happened? No idea. But when you get closer and closer, people begin to see, this is the basis of the local government work, is that it's more accessible. It's not, definitely not perfect, but it's more accessible. People more familiar through things like planning. And I think I don't think that's just the UK. I think that's relevant in most places, that local planning is more visible. There's more participation there, even though that's often a bit consultation tokenistic, but you know, that's where people understand. So there's definitely a problem with bridging scale and helping people to get involved in that. This is a really bad answer because I don't have the answer to what is in fact a really, really challenging problem. But yeah, there's definitely things to consider.
No, absolutely. And those issues of kind of scale and visibility, I think, are really important to pick out. We have another question here from Clean Coast again. Sorry, I don't know your name, whoever in Clean Coast is here with us, but welcome. This is an interesting one. It's almost about like the other side of ocean identity. They're saying that in Ireland, they sometimes wonder how to work on perception changes in people who are just used to seeing the ocean. It's just a fact of life because it's there all the time. And you know, it's with that the economic importance maybe of or the dependency on the ocean is waning in terms of, like, you know, less and less people fishing in Ireland, say. So they'd be interested to know, have you come across the same experience, and maybe have you done any work on changing how to, you know, in supporting marine citizenship, how to change perceptions for people who are used to seeing the coastal environment,
Yeah.
or maybe get them to understand it or engage with it in a different way?
Yeah, so first of all, yes, absolutely. There's another misconception that if you live by the sea, you love the sea and you'll care about its sustainability, which absolutely isn't true, for that very reason that often it's the backdrop. And also there's a big social context. Certainly in the UK, our coastal communities tend to be relatively deprived. And so that has, you know, other social contexts in terms of people moving away and things like that. Livelihood, I mentioned livelihood dependency was way the most significant of all of the different relationships. So of course, most livelihoods are not necessarily going to be based on marine livelihoods are not necessarily going to be based on a sustainability agenda. So that's why I'd emphasize that marine identity can work in different ways, and that's something to bear in mind. That problem of how do we create those connections is literally what the Plymouth Sound National Marine Park has been set up to do. So I don't have the answer, but we're absolutely working on it. So there's a program over the next 5 years. It's just been funded just before Christmas. That's going to be doing that work. That what I was talking about, the marine citizenship framework, learning how to effectively reach people with the different value sets and evaluating that, learning how to create ocean connections and what the requirements are for those ocean connections. So my hypothesis is we can connect to whatever's going on out there, however it looks. So that this like shifting baselines thing where, you know, you look at what it is today and you attach to it today. And then if things degrade, you notice, but you don't notice the degradation that's already gone. Those are really hard. And that's why I try and couple ocean recovery and the marine citizenship work. Did you ask me also about civic literacy at the beginning?
Yeah, I suppose I just mentioned that I thought it was a really interesting connection you were making between increasing ocean literacy and the need to increase civic literacy along with that, or the increase in ocean literacy might have the desired result, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So just quickly then, because of this sort of general challenge in getting people to engage democratically in many things, even when they really quite care, it can be not great engagement for lots of complex reasons that we talked about before around trust and empowerment and sense of effectiveness in doing so, and also knowing we don't have a civic education program at all in the UK, so people don't learn. I mean, that will be different in different places, but people don't learn how it works. So you can have all of the love and the care and the intention and do everything you can in your own sphere of influence, but if you don't know how it works, how can I take the next step? You know, who can I write to, or how do we create change? So I do work more at the governance side of things as well, in terms of trying to encourage decision makers to think about how they can in turn meet those people by changing their processes and supporting that kind of connection. And yeah, the civic literacy is part of that.
Great, thanks so much. We've got some more, but like maybe we just take one because I do want to wrap up before I think like people might start leaving on the hour if they have more meetings. Maybe just one quick one there is in terms of doing your own research, and structuring it is, where do you find your participants? I mean, and how do you engage with them? I know you mentioned you did some ethnography as well. I mean, did you do mainly interviews, or did you literally go down to the pier and start chatting to fishermen, or join people on beach cleans? And how important do you think it is kind of to add that kind of work as research in a project?
Yeah, so the case studies was how I found them. So I had heard about, through various different means, these 2 different marine groups. So I approached them and was like, would you like to participate in this research? So, and the National Citizen Science Project was really great because citizen science is such a big thing, and that was this is a few years ago now, so that was quite early on, and it was the first marine one I think we had in the UK, or at least coastal, and it was national. So that my case studies were in the southwest of England, so that gave me a national reach. And so then I did the survey with them. So through the survey, there was the opportunity to do more. And the interview and ethnographic bit, that went together. So I selected the participants out of the survey on the basis of diversity. So on the basis of divergent values, divergent measures on place relationship, and so on, so that I could try and find those people who were not typical. It's easier to reach the people who are interested in biology and science and the coast and learning, and they're already learners, and they're already, it's easier for us to do that, which is part of why that's what we do, because it's what we're used to. I include myself as well. More challenging is these people we don't reach and how we reach. So I was really trying to find those marine citizens who were different and to understand. So the understanding how they got to that journey, the survey has various questions about what they've done in terms of decision making and so on and so on. But the interview and the ethnography, so I interviewed them while they did marine citizenship. So whatever was their choice. So we did beach cleans. I went out on a boat and dropped lobster larvae into the sea, and we did various different things. We did observations of seal counting and things like that. So various different activities that I did with them, so that I could understand them quite individually about what their citizenship is and what it means to them and why they do it. And I think that is really important, because without digging into the difference and learning and understanding it, we're not going to be able to meet those people and reach those people. So it's a smaller sample because we reach more similar people more easily. So we have to work as researchers to do that.
No, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, I just think that's a very thorough research and engagement plan, I suppose, moving from scoping surveys and then picking a diverse group and working with them on the ground to see how they're, at some stage, I think I find in my work that, at the one hand, people will say they do some things, but then you go out and meet them, they kind of do different things, or it turns out that they're more interested in something else that you hadn't thought to ask them in a survey. So I just think that sounds really good. Okay, so we do have some more questions, but we better wrap up there. Thank you so much for those answers, Pam. It's just really interesting. 1 second there. I just want to quickly let people know, or let the audience know, that we do have 2 more webinars coming up. One on the 17th of April around positioning fishers as core partners for Mission Ocean projects. And webinar 9 is on the 24th of April, engaging children and young people in Mission Ocean. And again, these have been designed because they're 2 of the upcoming challenges or activities that the mission is funding in 2024 and across 2024 and 2025. And they engage directly with the mission's targets. So anyone interested in working on activity, like directly on Horizon Europe projects, or in any way on mission related activities, there will be funding, or that this aligns with, I suppose, EU level policy, which feeds down. So we hope to see many of you there. Sarah can put the registration link into the chat. I'll also send this out with the slides, so you'll get them in a couple of days' time. But just apart from that, I think that's just we can stop there and say thank you very much for joining. It was great to have so many of you here, and thank you so much to Pam and the 2 Sarahs for hosting this morning. It was a really interesting chat. So we'll see you all soon again, and thanks very much. Have a nice day. All the best.